What is up, Scream Team? Zach Cherry here, and this video is going to be my review for Scream 2022. My spoiler-free review, I should clarify. I won't be going over any plot or character points. I won't even be intimating towards them. I will be doing a spoiler review probably next week because there are a lot of things that I want to delve into. But in terms of this video, you're safe if you haven't seen the movie. Without really beating around the bush here, I'm gonna say that I really enjoyed this movie. I thought this was a great movie. My biggest takeaway leaving the movie is that I immediately wanted to go back and watch it again. And of course I didn't. I haven't yet. I'm probably gonna go see it again tomorrow. And several more times, I'm sure. But, you know, that wasn't really the case with, you know, other maybe more so recent horror movies. Not to throw anything under the bus, but I'll just say it. Halloween Kills, that was a very exhausting experience. And when I left that theater, I was ready to not watch that movie again for a while. So with Scream 2022, I was ready to jump right in again. And just while we're talking about the Halloween franchise, because, you know, just the idea of reboots is such a huge part of this movie, that this doesn't feel like it's competing with itself. It doesn't feel like it's competing with the first four movies that came before it, which is kind of how I felt about Halloween Kills and the Halloween 2018, like the whole David Gordon Green thing, where it was just like, well, we ruined this franchise, so now we need to redo it. And this movie doesn't do that. It's, you know, it's neither competing with the movies that came before it, nor is it negating them. It's honoring them. And that is kind of a really beautiful thing, especially since, you know, the whole movie is tributed to Wes Craven. So I really like it for that. There's no part in this movie that feels repetitive from the things that came before it. They're not recreating scenarios in, more specifically, the first Scream movie, because that's kind of what we've seen in Scream 2, 3, and 4. And it just gives the movie this overall vibe of something that we've never seen in this franchise before. And I'll let you decide if that's a good or bad thing. I personally think that it's a wonderful thing, but this felt different because Radio Silence wasn't copying Wes Craven. They were bringing their own unique style to the table, and they hit this one out of the park. If you've seen Ready or Not, that was a fantastic movie, and this is just as good, if not better than that. I really liked the new cast. I felt that they were developed well. They felt like real people, and there weren't really any one-note characters. There might have been like one or two, but, you know, they served their purpose for what they had to be. But nobody was really defined by their relationship to other people, which, I mean, for example, like a character like Trevor, whose entire shtick was just his obsession with Jill. These characters actually have a sense of agency about them. Like, everybody in this movie is kind of on guard and just thinking about, like, who should we be suspicious of? And that made everyone just seem a lot more accessible to me. Surprisingly, I was actually more interested in the new cast than I was with the legacy characters. And that's not to say that the legacy characters were done dirty. I felt that everybody kind of received a good balance of screen time here. It didn't feel like, you know, for instance, in Scream 4, where you had two groups of characters, each kind of vying for a bigger piece of the pie, only for nobody to really get any substantial quality screen time in the end. This movie makes sure that everybody is taken care of. There are some notes I have in terms of character, but I'll get more into those in my spoiler review when I do that, because it does pertain to Ghostface's motive, and I don't even want to touch upon any of that here. Despite the marketing for this movie stating that it wasn't going to be meta at all, this is actually very meta, maybe the most meta of all the movies, but it hits in a different kind of way. This is a lot more self-reflexive, and in that way it does what Scream 4 tried to do, but it did it more successfully, in my opinion. That movie referenced a lot of the remake cliches, but in the end it ultimately became a full-blown cliche in itself, whereas this one kind of goes back to subverting your expectations, and that's kind of where the surprises came in. There are a lot of twists and turns here, and I don't necessarily mean in a sense of like who lives and who dies or who turns out to be Ghostface, but more so just in the way that the plot unfolds. And that's kind of gonna bring me to what I think that this film's weakest aspect was, besides a few things that were kind of cringeworthy that I don't want to discuss here, but I'll get into in my spoiler review. But the pacing of the movie was definitely the film's weakest aspect. I don't know if that was necessarily avoidable, since with the new cast, there was a lot of ground to cover, because we do spend a good amount of the time just meeting these people and, discovering their history and things like that, that we don't really follow the same pattern that we did in Screams 1 to 4. But while I can handle like slow buildups and all that, like if it pays off later, I think one thing that felt like it was missing here are definable set pieces. And, for instance, if we're talking about the other movies, that might be something like in Scream 2, where Sydney and Hallie are trapped in the backseat of the police car and have to crawl out. Or, in Scream 4, when Ghostface calls Kirby from inside Olivia's closet. Moments like that, like for every fan of the franchise, whether you like the movie that they're in or not, you like those moments. Like those are movie defining moments. And there wasn't a lot of that in here. I can't even really think of anything that comes to mind. So the question then becomes, is this movie lacking in exciting and memorable moments? Or is it a situation where it's kind of greater than the sum of all of its parts? And I'm leaning towards the latter. I do think that, as a whole, this movie is like really excellent, and you kind of have to take it for everything from the start to the finish. But that's kind of gonna be the divide here, because if you're the type of Scream fan who measures the worth of a Scream movie on things like, did it have a really good opening scene, or did it have a really good killer reveal, or like really good deaths? And not to say that none of that is prevalent in this movie, because that's all like open to interpretation. But if you base your opinion just on like kind of like the bits and pieces of the movie rather than the movie in its entirety, you might not like this one. Whereas like if you are looking for like a really good story to just unfold from start to finish and just where it takes its characters, you probably really will. The thing is that the Scream movies mean so many different things to different people. So, what you might find value in one movie, someone else might not. Personally, I find value in all 5 of these movies, like regardless of where I put them in rank. I love each and every one of them. And I think one thing that I really respond to about these movies is the murder mystery aspect. And in terms of Scream 2022, I'm happy to say that it really does feel like it's going back to its roots, since this was such an integral part to the movie. And other than Scream 2, this seems to be the only movie where the characters are actively participating in a murder mystery, rather than just being unwitting passengers in a slasher. There's obviously going to be a lot to dissect with this movie, and I'll give you more of that in my spoiler review. But this is a movie, like, I'm not just gonna see it twice in the theater. I'm for sure gonna see it at least 5 times. And I really hope it does well. Just in terms of like this being financially successful, that will only just mean more Scream movies in the future. And with whatever direction they're going, I hope that radio silence is still involved, because I like the fact that this franchise has been consistent up until this point, and I hope it continues that way. So if you're big into Scream and new to the channel, make sure to check out some of my other related content here. Until next time, I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.